In the world of fighting, the strongest will typically win. This is not only a rule or philosophy that most fighters and people who enjoy reading or watching fights accept, but also seems to be embraced for the most part. Even power scalers in the Kengan Omega manga, whether you are a hardcore power scaler or you don't know much about power scaling but you get the gist that some characters are stronger than others, the question of whether a weaker character can beat a stronger one is a question that is actually quite simple to answer for most of us. In fact, this philosophy of might makes right or the strongest will win is a philosophy that was embedded in the first Kengan Annihilation tournament in Kengan Ashura by the admission of Sandrovich himself when he was talking about the character Kuroki. To which he says, and I quote, "But I decided to prioritize the sense of this tournament being one where the strongest man wins." And he ended up winning the whole thing. And so I typically expect most Kengan Ashura and Omega fans to take this as a given, which is why this fight is the most important fight of all of Kengan Omega, because it challenges the very foundation of this idea. And this fight is none other than Masaki versus Jurota. In this video, I'm going to go over this fight and why it might mark a huge shift in the philosophy of the Kengan verse. But before we get into that, don't forget to like and sub, and yeah, let's begin this analysis. The fight actually starts off in chapter 97 of the Kengan Omega manga, with Jurota the Gentle King choosing to take his turn to fight now as he eyes a particular person in the Kengan team, Meguro Masaki, who notices Jurota's gaze and senses that, well, the Gentle King wants to fight him in specific. And so Meguro answers his call and challenges the Gentle King in a fight. The first thing that we will probably have to look at here as they stare each other down is the fact that Jurota is not only taller than Meguro, but is also slightly heavier. This might not seem like much because the difference is rather slight, but you'll see how this actually plays into the greater pattern of this fight. And to put things into perspective, before we even get to the fight itself, I did want to talk about Jurota and everything we know about him, at least so far. Jurota was a talented judo practitioner. So talented, in fact, that at the young age of 19, he was already in the too strong camp, that he actually felt despair or boredom. However, in his despair, he manages to see another person who is talented, who is around 6 years younger than him, a 12-year-old Masaki Meguro, to which he, after seeing him once on television, knew that Masaki Meguro was going to be his nemesis. Jurota, by sheer intuition, was able to tell that Masaki Meguro was going to be a threat to him in the future. Despite the fact that he disappeared at some point, Jurota never stopped believing that one day he would meet his nemesis Masaki Meguro. And to prepare for him, on top of already being the strongest, so strong that he was not able to actually get a fair fight, typically went away for multiple years and went training. After training for years and years, pouring everything into judo, Jurota managed to achieve a feat that no one else in the entirety of the Kengan Omega verse can do, and that is the perfect swing. And to explain this briefly, in order to throw someone, you need at least 2 actions. First is grabbing and then throwing. Jurota managed to essentially skip the first step of grabbing. All Jurota really needs to do is touch you and you're thrown, or as good as thrown. This perfected swing technique just goes to show how much sheer talent and hard work Jurota put in order to prepare for his nemesis Masaki Meguro. Levels of mastery so high that it's even comparable to Kuroki Gensai himself, who confirms in this fight that Jurota is around the same level as him. However, now that we know a lot more about Jurota and how much he had poured into his strength, on top of the fact that he was already the strongest, we then proceed on to the fight. And I'll take a few steps back actually to Meguro's entrance. And while he actually goes into the stage to fight Jurota, we hear this about him. And that is the fact that Meguro actually does this for fun and doesn't take the underground fighting nearly as seriously as the rest of his peers that are on his team. However, despite the fact that he isn't really interested in this and only really does this as a hobby, he's managed to reach the highest level of the underground fighting arena. And so, Koga does indeed conclude that Masaki Meguro is indeed talented. However, Oma does state that it will take more than talent to beat someone like Jurota, who already had that going for him, as I explained earlier. And so, seemingly, the match then begins with both fighters taking their stances. However, the referee noticed something and calls for a timeout on the match, and that is the fact that Masaki Meguro was wearing something in his ears that he forgot to take off. Now, I won't go into what this ultimately was cause it's not important. He goes to put it away and comes back into the fight. What's important, however, is that once he comes back into the fight, his stance shifts from a right grip to a left grip. And it is at this point that Jurota actually asks him, hey, is he trying to shake Jurota up? But, and here is Masaki's direct quote, no, not at all. I just don't have any preferences when it comes to my stance. Who cares what stance you take as long as you win? Now, I know it seems like a lot. I haven't even touched the fight because the fight itself carries the same general themes as what I have described so far. Jurota has been preparing for this fight for years on end, and to Masaki Meguro, he met this person just a few moments ago and probably only noticed him when he was looking directly at him. With Jurota having multiple years of prep time, Jurota, with his talent and power, and of course preparation, should win this fight. And when the fight starts, and arguably for the rest of the fight, he is absolutely dominant in the fight, being able to throw Masaki Meguro almost every single time they come into contact. The perfect swing is something that Meguro Masaki seems to not be able to get around at all. Every single one of his attempts to try to actually throw Jurota or hit him end in dismal failure. However, Masaki Meguro is able to get up every single time. And that is the fact that, well, Masaki seems to be an actual masochist, since he was cloned from, of course, the original Masaki Meguro. And so, pain that would typically slow down normal human beings and injuries that of course would be hard to carry on fighting from are no issue for both the original Masaki Meguro and the now clone of Masaki Meguro. And so Masaki is able to get up from Jurota's perfect swing every single time like an undead zombie. But that is not the only problem Jurota is facing. The other problem that Jurota is facing in this fight are the rules of the purgatory matches. And that is the fact that you cannot kill your opponent. And so because of this rule, Jurota has to nerf his own swings so that Meguro can get hopefully knocked out but not killed in the process, which would be very difficult to do against someone who is a masochist. And so, despite the fact that Jurota is indeed stronger and would win in a judo match and probably in a Kengan match, he isn't in any of those. He is in a purgatory match against his nemesis. And so, he has to somehow win despite the rules and his opponent's talent. If we can even call a masochist talented. But Jurota is still dominant in this fight for the most part. But unfortunately for him, he cannot remain dominant in this fight forever. Masaki seems to be catching up little by little by first getting a triangular choke on Jurota, to which reveals the next weakness of Jurota as a fighter, and that is when his hand is actually free and he's able to strike Meguro, he doesn't. And Meguro uses this weakness to later on win the fight. However, this weakness was the fact that Jurota refused to actually strike his opponent. He only used judo and basically throwing his opponents. And though this seems to be a huge weakness for Jurota, it was also the means by which he was able to attain the perfect swing, and so it was a double-edged sword. But ultimately, however, considering that he gains the perfect swing, I wouldn't say Jurota made the wrong decision in taking that type of vow. However, the means by which Jurota attained greater strength was now being used against him in this fight. And so, Meguro then starts relentlessly striking Jurota. However, Jurota is actually able to cope, but is actually losing ground little by little, because now his opponent is aware of a disadvantage in Jurota's strength. And so it seems as though the tides of the battle are changing in Meguro's favor, despite the fact that Jurota is able to get the upper hand on multiple occasions. Masaki seemed to have been built for this very moment. Lo Long, as he's watching this fight, sort of personifies Jurota's problem as being too powerful for purgatory. So powerful, in fact, that his strength is now being his greatest weakness. And of course, we know how this ends. Eventually, Masaki ends up getting the upper hand completely and wins the fight. Being unable to strike your opponent in order to finish them or knock them out was bad enough. Him actually having to nerf himself and the power of his swings was also a huge disadvantage. But his opponent being Masaki Meguro, who, by the way, and this is the biggest bizarre aspect of this fight, Masaki Meguro is dead. What Jurota is fighting is a clone. Most people are aware of that. And so not even Masaki Meguro's death stopped this match from actually happening. Everything in this fight, even Jurota's own power, was used against him for his eventual downfall. The strongest seemingly don't always win in Kengan Omega, which is something that is first of course stated by Lo Long, but Kuroki also parrots this same idea. There are forces that are greater than just strength and skill at play here. And that is why this fight is important. It is that shift of philosophy of the strongest always winning to no, there are greater forces in play. Whether you think it is fate, some sort of determinism at play here, really depends on how you want to read the story. However, one thing that is abundantly clear here is that Masaki was not supposed to win against his fight against Jurota. Or he was meant to win against his fight against Jurota no matter what. That not even death could stop the eventual outcome of this fight. And that's it. That's the video. If you like this type of analysis and theory type, well, it's not really theory now that I think about it. But yeah, if you like these types of videos, don't forget to like and sub. And until next time, take it easy.